Hello. In this video, I present a research paper that I've previously presented at a musical theatre history conference in London. The purpose of the paper is to answer the following questions. Firstly, did musical theatre fill a space in the theatrical landscape that was left by the retirement of silent cinema? Secondly, how is the model of the palimpsest embodied by the medium of musical theatre? And thirdly, can early cinema be posited as an access channel that relates musical theatre to pre-20th century visual arts that are usually beyond the remit of the medium's historiography? I solely focus upon the visual elements of musicals as I answer these questions. Therefore, the video doesn't address the role of sound and music in both silent cinema and musical theatre, which is a substantial area that's worthy of an entirely separate body of research. Now, I have added a few extra paragraphs to the version of the paper that I present in this video. Well, they were already in the paper, it's just that I had to cut them out for the conference to adhere to the time restrictions. I have also studied many more areas of aesthetic comparison between silent film and musical theatre, but again, I ended up having to limit the scope as I only have time to properly address two topics. As such, this work exclusively focuses on how palimpsest aesthetics permeate both silent era cinema and musical theatre, and how musical theatre finales resurrect the Apotheosis trope of early cinema. So, let's move on to the paper. Instances where images of archival documents are grafted onto the musical stage demonstrate musical theatre's potential to not only display histories, but to also incentivise new ways of relating them to the contemporary world. The visual design for the number Do Not Fight the Storm from the 2015 Broadway production of the musical Allegiance projects the image of a real historical document onto live performing bodies. Designer Darryl Maloney chose to overlay the so-called loyalty questionnaire that burdened the lives of Japanese American citizens in 1943 as part of a broader projection enterprise. Allegiance is pervaded with, quote, the distressed quality of old photos found in one's attic, full of scratches and imperfections, end quote. Maloney simultaneously gives realism to theatricality and embodiment to historical artefacts. The act of layering visuals to produce these ends, easily enabled by common theatre apparatus such as gauze curtains, lights and projectors, provokes the association of the stage musical's visual space with the aesthetic concept of the palimpsest. Palimpsests are conventionally regarded as a centuries-old textual tradition that was initiated by the costly expense of paper. The consequent need for writers to reuse parchment that had already been written upon seemingly disregards any perceived notion of permanency. However, Matthew Battles observes how, quote, the ink and faint imprint of the prior text underlies the new work, preserving a trace of something that had been rubbed out. The palimpsest is evidence that there is no true erasure, end quote. He further comments on the receptive aspects of palimpsests, identifying their appeal to the way in which, quote, the mind always strives to make connections, end quote, even when such relationships are, quote, merely fortuitous, end quote. Acts of both writing over previous statements and relational reading between layers aptly describe the character of palimpsest compositions. From this, the research that follows aims to provide a filmic perspective on the question of where historical texts might be seen through visual imagery in contemporary musicals. The literary palimpsest arises as a convenient analytical framework with which to address the question because it simultaneously exists as an aesthetic reference and a theoretical analogy. Literary theorist Gerard Genette used the term as a title for his influential treatise in which he introduces hypertextuality. Corresponding to the progressions of hazy textual remnants in literal palimpsests, hypertextuality describes any textual subject as a hypertext which can act as a gateway to deep networks of texts that collectively define its meaning. He calls these hypo-texts. Such a model facilitates a contemplation of the subtleties of dialogues between separate texts. Hypertextual analysis regards texts in accordance with the reader's entire media landscape and the works with which they are likely to be familiar, either through direct consumption or through intertextual references in other texts. Although Genette's theorisations are preoccupied with written literature, he remarks that hypertextuality, quote, is more massively prevalent in the dramatic world on stage than in the narrative world, end quote. Theatre's complex manner of unintentionally resurrecting shadows of past performances through new work has since been affirmed by Marvin Carlson in The Haunted Stage, and by Adam Rush's research into the receptive implications of intertextual references, many of which are self-referential, in contemporary musicals. However, the question of whether musical theatre filled a space in the theatrical landscape that was left by the retirement of silent cinema benefits from specific reference to Genette's palimpsestic vision of hypertextuality. The material terms with which Genette explains a reader's experience of indistinct textual relationships prompts a contemplation of visual layering across both mediums. Detachments of colour and sound from silent cinema's photographic base cause it to be read in view of several performative inscriptions that are fortuitously connected. The farthest inscription is the performance that took place in the profilmic environment, often a studio setting. These visions of photographed action are typically perceived as the core element of the performance, yet numerous aspects of this layer are effaced for the audience. The viewer perceives the physical performance while the natural colour of the scene and the lines spoken by the actors are, to use Battle's phrasing, rubbed out like the deepest etchings of a palimpsest. The recorded performance is then processed photographically, constituting another layer of mechanical and chemical rendering. Film throughout the 1900s was often colorised by hand, either by painting aniline dyes onto each individual frame, or via more streamlined stenciling processes such as Pathé colour. Early film colour can be interpreted as one of the most conspicuous indicators of the medium's palimpsestic aesthetic when it was used. Colourists applied their distinct performative layer through their interpretive choices of colour and which components of the scene to colorise. Joshua Umib has responded to early film's chromatic texts, suggesting that film colour performs and signifies upon the photographic base. His work argues that colourists inscribe their own signifiers into the text. Their additions mediate the viewer's interpretation of drama in a liminal space where, quote, thoughts, emotions and their auratic emanations are colour-coded, end quote. The colour layer is therefore a metatextual dimension of the silent film palimpsest, as its function in readership is as critical as it is illustrative. The same can be said of the embedding of intertitles during post-production, which provide another characteristic and complex inscription to silent film aesthetics. Then the film is exhibited. The projection of the recorded action onto a 12 by 16 foot screen means that the viewer is faced with another performative inscription. The film image is now rendered through light and the peculiarities of the projector, such as its noises and the flickering of frames. Finally, the practice of accompaniment within the exhibition space accents silent film's appearance as palimpsest. Live verbal lectures, diverse forms of musical accompaniment and any other supplementary entertainments mediate the spectator's access to the filmic image through a metatextual relationship that is similar to colour. As such, the idiosyncrasies that define the medium of silent cinema are the elements that also define it as a palimpsestic form. Few other modern performance forms flaunt detachments and dialogues within their material structures in such a manner, but stage musicals are an exception. From a historiographic perspective, contemporary musical theatre generally perpetuates many traditions that were popular in silent film culture. Its proclivity for melodrama, expressive soliloquies, and poetic venerations of glittering generalities such as hope, love, and freedom parallel film content from across the silent era and across countries. Moreover, the difficult settlement of film as an independent and sustainable medium, and its escape from its early lowbrow reputation, is echoed in the musical's history. Such kinship is clear when studies of musicals tactfully aligning themselves with the classical arts to combat similar perceptions are read in conjunction with similar silent era efforts in film. For instance, Kaveh Asghari has written a case study of film director Rex Ingram's efforts to facilitate what he calls, quote, institutional contact, end quote, between his films and the arts of sculpture and painting. In parallel, David Chandler investigates how Andrew Lloyd Webber situates his musical The Phantom of the Opera within a contrived history of opera indicating related anxieties. But how can the West End or Broadway musical be regarded as palimpsestic? Transitions from book to number have temporal consequences that have been identified by Scott Macmillan, and gain additional significance when considered under Mikhail Bakhtin's theory of chronotopes. The idea that, quote, there exists a variety of senses of time and space, end quote, has been used in literary research to better understand the categorization of texts into genres. Time might be viewed as a culturally coded phenomenon that influences action differently according to distinct categories of space. For example, a classroom, typically engendered by tightly scheduled lesson plans, produces a spatio-temporal feeling that contrasts with that of a social gathering in a park. They therefore represent two distinct chronotopes. As such, multi-locational numbers in musicals produce spatio-temporal problems that are alleviated by the medium's palimpsestic tendencies. The ensemble performance of Around Here in 9 to 5, for example, effaces the pre-established time-space experience of the working corporate office in which the number is set. Inscribing the temporal arrangements of music over very similar chronotopes not only occasions the escapist utopia identified by Richard Dyer, but also necessitates the relational reading induced by palimpsests. In many cases, the musical's reflexive time-space representations are given visual parallels. Numbers that depict two or more characters sharing song from different locations, such as Journey On from Ragtime, plaster conflicting chronotopes with the impression of a unified experience of time. The characters appear on the same stage while remaining diegetically distant, thereby reviving the vision scene trope of early film. Silent era vision scenes entail composite photography, joining two separately filmed pieces of footage in the same frame. Examples in Santa Claus, Joan of Arc, and Cinderella or the Glass Slipper demonstrate filmmakers' reliance upon vision scenes to share a character's dream experience with the cinema audience. They signify a rejection of natural orders of time in favour of a mediated temporality. The impression of passing time in the framing scene is shaped by the duration of the embedded vision footage, which impresses a metronomic sense of cohesion upon the depicted reality. Such abstraction is faithful to the foregrounding of display in the cinema of attractions, and models the spatial dynamics that would later characterise the stage musical. In Journey On, Tata's experience of time, influenced by his anticipation to arrive in America, might differ from Father's experience, having just departed. Meanwhile, the chronotope of the middle-class home from which Mother contributes to the song offers a vastly different category of space. Frank Gray's description of the early cinematic vision scene forging a, quote, formally unified and enigmatic whole, end quote, also applies to these stagings of musical numbers. The fabricated pictorial composition secures the pleasing qualities of togetherness and symmetry, while the narrative indicators of dislocated environments keep the spectator tacitly aware of temporal conflicts between the vignettes. The palimpsestic image of the loyalty questionnaire that is projected onto actors in Allegiance can be reassessed by considering how vision content dictates temporal organisation of space. The quote, patronising and insulting, end quote, historical artefact imposes its own spatio-temporal character, a chronotope of government-issued paperwork. The experience of time and space felt by the characters as they reluctantly abandoned their homes to travel to internment camps was moulded by an object that takes on a character of its own rather than being an inexpressive prop. As such, theatrical palimpsests can embody the feeling of historical events by capturing dimensions of artefacts that cannot be easily accessed through scholarly contemplations. Similar dynamics can also be investigated between the musical and classical artworks. The evocation of religious Renaissance iconography to resurface culturally imprinted emotions is more broadly present in the contemporary musical's fabric than might initially be apparent. A clear understanding of how Apotheosis tableaux influenced the development of musical theatre spectacle can be gained by first examining their conspicuous presence in the early cinema of attractions. Apotheosis scenes are another influence from continental Europe and are primarily a feature of what is known as the Frères film. Surviving films of this genre largely belong to the back catalogue of Pathé Frères and Georges Méliès' Star Films Company, two of France's most renowned silent era film studios. Films such as Bluebeard, The Kingdom of the Fairies, and Aladdin and His Wonderlamp are essentially filmic revivals of the 19th century fairy plays that were especially popular in French theatre. The fairy genre championed, quote, spectatorial address, end quote, in both its theatre and film incarnations, perhaps preempting France's later spectacle musicals as outlined by Olaf Hubin. However, filmic versions of the fairy infused the genre with unique photographic possibilities. These films benefited from the fantastical luminosity of applied colour, and substitution tricks, such as the instant transformation of the spinster into the wicked fairy in Pathé's Sleeping Beauty. Historian Richard Abel explains how, alongside, quote, elaborate dance scenes, end quote, a fairy film is identifiable by its final pictorial composition, the apotheosis. These lavish visual codas occur at the end of many surviving fairy films and are a component of early cinema's tableau style. They provide no narrative content and display triumphant characters centre frame in a heavenly space. Protagonists are celebrated by parades of often dancing ensemble members who are lower in the frame and are surrounded by celestial emblems of good fortune. Apotheosis sequences can be regarded as one of the most frequent inclinations towards intermediality and tableau vivants within film's silent era. Intertitles isolate the tableau in surviving prints of certain films, such as Ferdinand Zecher's Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves and Albert Capellani's The Sheep's Foot. Such titles headline the final segment with the word apotheosis, or the French apotheose, signifying the scene's transcendence from the narrative proper. Abel claims that, quote, the term apotheosis stems from the stage tradition, end quote. However, extant scripts from French fairy plays are viewable through the Library of Congress online archive, and these suggest an absence of the actual term in the stage genre. Nevertheless, they confirm the prominence of decorative tableaux, emphasising the fairy's spectacle through excessive stage directions. These directions prove the stage apotheosis to be as codified as their film counterparts, because they describe recurrent motifs. 19th century stage apotheoses were repeatedly introduced by the rising of the curtain of clouds, and are also accompanied by seraphic choruses meant to represent air, a Disney-esque musical addition to the tableau. The association of the term apotheosis with early film finales places these cinematic images in the same semantic field as Renaissance and neoclassical apotheosis paintings. Film, or more specifically Pathé Frères, effectively implies its own historical connectedness to Renaissance masterpieces such as Paolo Veronese's Apotheosis of Venice in its Apotheosis trope. Like the Pieta tableau that appears in musical theatre death scenes from Little Shop of Horrors to Les Misérables, Apotheoses have glaringly religious origins. They symbolise the spiritual transcendence of deceased emperors as well as allegorical figures into heaven. Their potential subjects altered to include social and military figures, particularly Napoleon Bonaparte, as the idiom persisted into the 18th and 19th centuries. Filmmakers such as Méliès, Zecca, Capellani and Vell secularised the trope in many instances by exchanging overt depictions of heaven for a more general meta-theatrical space. The 1927 musical Showboat subtly evokes the spectacle of the early film Apotheosis in its final scene. The relationship conflict between the characters Magnolia and Gaylord is resolved, and Magnolia suggests that they ascend to the top deck of Cotton Blossom, the titular showboat. Her father, Caponandi, encourages them to do so and instructs them to go up front. The final stage tableau is assembled as they do so, with their daughter Kim entering as a central subject, accompanied by a seraphic choral refrain of the song Old Man River. Showboat's orderly progression from dramatic equilibrium to pictorial arrest enacts a type of ceremonial protocol that can be observed in some silent film apotheoses. The Hen That Laid the Golden Eggs includes an apotheosis in which a designated member from a chorus of ballerinas, dressed as chickens, directs the composition of the tableau. In other examples, the role of the apotheosis facilitator is held by secondary magical characters, like a fairy godmother, as in Ali Baba, or a wizard, as in the Blue Bird. They lead the subjects to a central position and cue the deification of the character in a pageantry routine that Caponandi revives in Showboat. The overtly religious epilogue that concludes Les Misérables conveys apotheosis principles in a more striking manner. The death of Jean Valjean in the musical's finale occasions his transcendence to a heavenly space, referencing the neoclassical painted apotheoses. However, the facilitator role in the early film Apotheosis is enacted when the spirits of Fantine and Eponine lead Valjean to his centre stage position. The musical's final tableau is also faithful to the reflexivity of early film apotheoses. The arrested finales of fairy films materialised as a space where actors look knowingly towards the camera. They betray the diegesis by acknowledging the viewer and marking the film as theatrical. Les Misérables' epilogue resurrects this practice through the sudden appearance of direct address. A series of questions: do you hear the people sing? Will you join in our crusade? Say, do you hear the distant drums? Are directed at the audience. The collapse of diegesis is a significant aspect of apotheosis moments in both theatre and early film. In silent fairies such as Bluebeard, the literal felling of set pieces and backdrops reveal a deeper celestial space that transcends narrative. Finales in contemporary stage musicals likewise evoke spectacle through diegetic collapse, even when their affinities with the traditional apotheosis are less explicit. The finale number, Raise You Up, Just Be, from Kinky Boots, begins as a diegetic performance by the drag queen protagonist Lola during a fashion show in Milan. The collapse of the musical's diegesis during the number is indicated by the eventual inclusion of the entire cast dancing and singing around the stage, disregarding the Milan context from which the number began. A direct address to the real-life audience further presents the diegesis as having ended, as the Price and Simon secret to success is recited to the audience by multiple supporting characters. Lola's efforts in advertising the Kinky Boots has led to the company's triumph, and the number accordingly modulates towards a complete and conclusive apotheosis of the character. Elsewhere, the musical theatre apotheosis is merely conceptual, but remains an ever-present part of the medium.
the histo-remix that concludes 6 envisions an alternate history where the characters, avatars of King Henry VIII's 6 wives, did not succumb to tragic deaths. Instead, the lyrics of the song 6 activate an apotheosis space where the ex-wives triumph over the king and enjoy fulfilling musical careers. This paper has positioned the West End and Broadway musical as a populist historiographical device by spotlighting its palimpsestic visual space. Matthew Battles observes that a palimpsest, quote, wills itself forward into new forms, which, however they try to erase the old, are committed to bearing their traces, end quote. Musical theatre's materiality bears numerous traces of silent era cinematic spectacle, some of which were sadly beyond the remit of this presentation. Genette states that, quote, a simple understanding of the hypertext never necessitates resorting to the hypotext, end quote, yet the hypertext, quote, always stands to gain by having its hypertextual status perceived, end quote. Musical theatre unknowingly participates in the preservation of an important part of film and art history by reenacting the visual compositions and reception processes of silent film and its intertextual shadows. In return, musicals gain the ability to gratify audiences through arrangements of space and tableau that have historically induced spectacle, but have become obscured amid technological and artistic advancements. Battles draws from Thomas de Quincey's view that material palimpsests ironically protect old texts through their apparent act of destruction. He writes, quote, as an author's cultural stock declines in value, the material on which her work was expressed becomes an object of desire, end quote. This, quote, secondary element of value to the total result, end quote, slips to the forefront over time as palimpsests, quote, preserve the traces of these past words and add to their preciousness and significance, end quote. Silent films certainly participated in such historiographical record-keeping, and musical theatre evidently follows its example. Empathetic and populist histories such as this study come with their own challenges as they rely upon abstract theories of readership rather than clear linear timelines. However, they are significant in the pursuit of a full understanding of the musical's silent shadow.